These are the top 4 bow tuning tips for bow hunters that can give you more confidence and more accuracy in your setup than any other thing you can do when setting up and tuning your bow. Time is valuable, and you shouldn't spend it on the nitty-gritty details of all the other things you can do to perfect your setup unless you have these 4 bow tuning steps done perfectly first. First up is so simple, but I think so many people overlook it because there's never enough emphasis put on it, but this has a huge determining factor in your accuracy, especially with broadheads, and that is cam sync. Cam sync, often confused with cam timing, is referring to the stops on the cams coming around and making contact with the cables or the limbs at exactly the same time. Cam timing, on the other hand, is actually the cam positions at rest before drawing back. Cam sync is extremely important that the cams are synchronized with each other so that they are moving exactly in the perfect position with each other to achieve perfect vertical nock travel when the arrow is coming out of your bow. Again, this is critical if you're a bow hunter shooting broadheads, mechanical or fixed. You've got to have perfect cam sync. This is easily overlooked or easily missed because so many people don't have bow presses. They don't have draw boards to be able to do this. So it is crucial you go to your local bow shop, you work with them, or you go to your local archery guru that has a press so you can get your cams perfectly in sync so you're not getting vertical nock travel, especially if your broadheads are impacting higher or lower than your field points. Now, I'm not going to waste your time showing you how to sync your cams here in this video, but we've got plenty of other bow tuning and bow setup videos that show how to sync your cams. The next tuning tip is having the proper arrow setup for your bow. Now, we can get into the weeds with this as much as you want, but let's just focus on keeping things simple with the most important factors that are going to influence your accuracy with broadheads as a bow hunter. The first is arrow spine. Now, it's important to understand that there is static arrow spine and there is dynamic arrow spine. Now, static arrow spine is the spine measurement that you see on the arrow box when you're purchasing your arrows. How static spine is measured is a 29-inch shaft with 2 points at 28 inches with a 880-gram weight hung from the middle of it. Now, how much that arrow flexes down on that weight is an inch measurement, and that gives you your static spine. So a 500 spine arrow is going to flex down 0.5 inches. A 340 spine arrow is going to flex down 0.34 inches, which is why a 340 is stiffer than a 500. Dynamic spine, on the other hand, has to do with how much that arrow flexes when it is coming out of your bow. Now, the factors that influence this is arrow length, point weight, rear weight, and how hard that bow is actually pushing the arrow out of your bow. A longer arrow, or an arrow with more weight in the front or with more pressure coming from the back of the arrow from the bow pushing it out, will make that shaft flex more because it is essentially making that spine react weaker. Whereas the opposite inputs will give you the opposite results. A shorter arrow with less weight in the front will be stiffer. It won't quite flex as much as an arrow that's longer that has more weight in the front. It's important to refer to the arrow chart on the back of the box of your arrows, as that will get you within the range of where you need to be with your arrow spine. Now, there's lots of other tests that you can do to find the optimal arrow spine for the best forgiveness and the most accuracy out of your setup, but what's important isn't that you're perfect with your arrow spine, it's just important that you are in the range of where you need to be to get broadheads to fly accurately with your field points as a bow hunter. Note that if you have weak arrows, you might struggle to get your broadheads impacting with your field points consistently. That extra flex is making that broadhead take over in a lot of the flight and making that arrow veer one direction or another. Now, on the other side, if you have a slightly stiff arrow, the stiff arrows typically will steer a fixed blade broadhead more forgiving, more accurately, but perhaps not as forgiving and as accurate as an arrow with the optimal spine range. The next important thing with your arrow is the fletching combination that you choose. Now, don't overthink this. There are dozens and dozens of fletching combinations you can use that will work perfectly fine, but let's just keep it simple here. The important thing to note is that the height of your fletching, which is the distance from your arrow to the top of the fletching out like this, we want that measurement to be as long or longer than the widest part of our broadhead. That way our fletchings on the back of the arrow have more steering power than our broadhead on the front of the arrow. Now, don't overcomplicate this. There's no need to overdo this. A simple 3 fletch of blazer vanes with a slight offset will steer almost any fixed blade broadhead on the market as long as your bow is properly tuned. The problem with having too much fletching or too much helical is several things, but first of all, the increased noise of your arrow flying through the air. Animals can hear that a lot more than they can hear your bow, and that can potentially make them duck your shot and duck out of the way. Secondly, if your fletchings are too big, you could be getting fletching contact against your cables, your arrow rest, or the riser of your bow, and that will definitely disrupt your perfect arrow flight. Lastly, if you have too much fletching helical or your fletchings are too big, it's going to slow down your arrows faster than they normally would when you're shooting at distance. Again, don't get too caught up in this. A standard 1/2 inch tall fletching, fletched either 3 or 4 fletch with a slight offset or helical is all you need to steer almost any fixed blade broadhead on the market as long as your bow is tuned well. The last thing with arrows is arrow weight. A good rule of thumb is 6 to 7 grains per pound of draw weight, which will give you a great balance of energy in your arrow and speed and trajectory as a bow hunter. Going overly heavy or overly light on your arrow will not benefit you. If you're shooting low poundage, I would not recommend shooting an arrow lighter than 300 grains, but my wife Rachel shoots a 342 grain arrow and shoots roughly 40 pounds, and she has had no problems getting pass-throughs on deer. I urge you all to form your own opinion, but heavier arrow weight is not always better. What you lose in trajectory, you do not gain in the slight amount of increase in energy that arrow is going to carry in today's modern compounds. If you are worried about penetration with your setup, you need to turn your bow poundage up, not shoot a heavier arrow. The third bow tuning tip here is making sure your bow is properly set up to fit you. Now there's multiple different factors here, but the big ones are making sure your draw length and your peep height are exactly where they need to be for you. If these are off, it can be much more difficult to consistently repeat your shot after shot. To find your proper draw length, it's important that you just find your proper draw length range and then adjust slightly shorter or slightly longer from there. To learn in detail how to find your proper draw length, please watch the video linked in our description from our Learn Archery series. To find the proper peep height, you do this after you've adjusted to your correct draw length. Now, proper peep height is always going to depend upon where your anchor point is with your wrist strap release or your handheld release. I also recommend watching our detailed videos of how to anchor with a wrist strap and how to anchor with a handheld release to find the most consistent anchor point for you, which will aid in helping you find your proper peep height location. Now, bow poundage, holding weight, stabilizer weight, D-loop length, all of these are definitely factors that can come into play with how the bow fits you, but the biggest factors that are going to determine accuracy for you are definitely going to be your draw length and your peep height. The last but not least top bow tuning tip to maximize your accuracy as a bow hunter is broadhead tuning. As a bow hunter, this is truly your end-all be-all tuning method, as if your broadheads don't come out of your bow straight and impact where you want them to, no other tuning will matter. Now, I do personally prefer to paper tune or bare shaft tune before screwing on broadheads and then just making slight rest adjustments from there once I have those initial tuning steps done. Now, you don't need to do this. You can just shoot broadheads as long as you have everything else set up properly first, as long as you know how to read them, where they're flying, and what rest adjustments, cam shim adjustments, and other adjustments you need to make so that your broadheads can fly on accurately and straight with your field points. We have another video dedicated to this entire process, as it's not always quite as simple as just moving your rest a little bit one direction or another. Now, there are lots of additional tuning methods and steps that you can do to achieve forgiveness and accuracy out of your setup, but the most important thing as a bow hunter is that your broadhead tipped arrow is flying straight out of your bow and impacting behind your pin with your field points. We created a step-by-step video on how to achieve this, and I encourage you to watch and follow the process so that you can get the best broadhead flight possible. So we put out a lot of information on detailed bow setup and tuning, but I never want to confuse you guys with some of the little details that don't matter if you don't have these big ones right first. If you follow these 4 bow tuning tips, I promise it will be time and energy well spent. Don't forget the most important aspect of it all: get out, shoot your bow, learn your equipment, build confidence, and we wish you the best of luck this fall. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.